Welcome to Corralling the Chaos podcast, where we talk publicly about the things you're worried about privately. My name is Angela Leah, and I'm your host. This is the event industry podcast for companies and crew, where we're going to dive deep into things like what does our industry need that it just doesn't have? What are the things you want to know, but you're just too afraid to ask? And what are the biggest opportunities ahead for our industry? We're going to go deep, and nothing is off limits. Welcome back to another episode of Corralling the Chaos. Today we have a special guest with us that's going to help us unpack some do's and don'ts and some advice for techs joining the industry, as well as some of those that have been in the industry that it's a good refresher, right? Of good things to do to help market yourself, to find more gigs, and to how to really stand out in this industry. So with that, welcome Michelle Smith for joining us. Michelle has been in the industry crewing for over 17 years. She's done crewing for companies like PRG, LMG, IMS, all the three-letter acronyms, as well as Christie Lights. And then for the past year, we are honored that she has done that with LASSO. She does a great job and really prides herself in establishing great relationships with the techs in the industry. I can certainly vouch for that. The thing I love about Michelle is she really connects on a human level with these people. She gets to know them, their families, they become friends. And that's really important in this type of industry. But she loves helping crew and clients create a great experience. So thank you, Michelle, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. I want to start first with you kind of have to be really committed to this industry to do what you do and to do it for the past 17 years. We hear our clients talk about crewing. They say it's like a game of Tetris, right? You've got to serve your own internal company as well as the techs, pitting people in the right slots. And it's not just warm bodies, right? It's really kind of matching the skill set with what the need is of the client, what type of show it is, what type of room it is. So there's a lot of things that you have to balance. So you've obviously been here for a long time. You stayed through the pandemic. So why do you love this industry?
Oh, hands down, the people. Like you said, there are so many great people in this industry. It takes kind of a little bit of certain kind of individual, not just to get started in the industry, but to continue to want to be in the industry and be successful. And there's just there's brilliant people and folks that are just a lot of fun, folks that are truly genuine that will have your back. So I think, like you said, I've established relationships. We've experience milestones together in life, vacation together, experience the ups and downs. And so there's just really some great, great people in this industry.
Agreed. And I'm sure in your time in this industry, you've had thousands and thousands of conversations. So when you think about, trying to connect with these people for the first time, in those initial conversations, what makes a great tech stand out?
The first thing that comes to mind is attitude. I'm not a technical person. So for me, it's more of those other skills that I notice first. Someone that just is always going to be positive because, as we know, the industry is the only predictable thing is the unpredictability of it, right? So, folks that can roll with the punches, that know how to handle the stress on site, last minute changes, and still have a good attitude. Sometimes it's not pleasant, of course, that's just the reality. Um, but folks that are able to just have a good attitude with the folks hiring them. And also, we put a tremendous amount of trust in these individuals to be face to face with our clients. So the ability to know that, to have peace of mind for us that we can do that, and you're going to put your best foot forward, put us in a good light, and you're going to make the client feel at ease, and you're going to be helpful to them. Right now, dependability is also huge.
Mhm.
Following through in your commitment, being reliable. There's a lot of opportunity out there and not a lot of folks that are available to take those opportunities. So that's a huge one. Those client skills is huge. So, but I think ultimately it all gets wrapped up into the attitude.
So that's a really good point, right? Because you can't really portray that on a resume, right? The attitude. So how do you gauge that in a phone call? Is it something that say that they like give me an example of when you talk to a tech and you're like, something about them makes me feel like they're not going to have a great attitude. So what are some of those things that you see, some of the red flags
Yeah.
that are like, yep, this person may not have the right attitude for this?
Yeah, well, right off the bat, sometimes when you're on the phone with them, it could just be, you can tell that they're not fully giving you their attention. They're kind of
Mhm.
multitasking in the background, and especially if they've scheduled the call, I feel like there's not really an excuse for that unless something came up, and then
Mhm.
you can always reschedule. Other things that come up are if they tend to have a lot of negative comments related to previous clients or even other crew members and technicians, that's usually kind of a bit of a flag as well as to just their overall attitude and their
Mhm.
behavior and just kind of their perspective. Yeah, if they're even late to the call, things like that, because obviously we know being on time is integral to this industry.
Yeah.
So that's always,
Yeah.
kind of a first impression as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you talk about attitude in this industry, which I think is such an important skill set for people to have because, we all know there are people that have been in this industry for 30 years that are unbelievably talented when it comes to their technical skill set, but either their arrogance or their attitude or their cynicism kind of gets in the
Mhm.
way. So, why do you think so many people in our industry are skeptical and cynical?
Well, frankly, they've been burned.
Mhm.
There are a lot of companies out there that are a little less than honest, have treated technicians poorly and not
Yeah.
fairly. When you think of these technicians, they're the sole person responsible for their livelihood. So
Mhm.
they have to be very particular in who they choose to work with. And if they've been burned in the past and a new client calls them up, unless that client came via a recommendation from a trusted source or it's somebody they worked with before, it's understandable why they would be a little hesitant and kind of glass half full. But then you have the opportunity to prove them wrong. I think, they have might have a bad experience on site. Let's say an end client makes a bad decision. The end client is
Yeah.
not necessarily the person that booked you and is going to pay you. So sometimes there is an association naturally that, one is responsible for the other, but that's not reality. So I think that sometimes is a part of it as well. And the way to fix that really is just treat your people right, not just most of the time, but every time.
Yeah, that's so true. And these techs talk, right? The companies who
Mhm.
are known for doing great things and treating their crew with respect and paying well and paying on time, they have a reputation. On the flip side, those that don't, they also have a reputation, right? So it's important to pick the reputation that you want to carry because you have one, whether you like it or not. It's just, we all strive to have a good reputation. But you brought up something interesting. Many times it's the end client who's making
Mhm.
decisions and then it kind of all falls downhill, right? That chaos, it kind of starts in one place and typically the recipient is, the crew member on site, the people on
Right.
site, the producer, right? And they're just kind of asked to deal with it. And so there it is a very fragmented industry, especially since so many of these people are freelancers, right? They work for numerous companies throughout the year. So there's not a lot of loyalty or connection that would exist as if they were a full-time person on their bench. So we as an industry obviously have a lot of work to do to kind of entice and enhance that connection and community within the industry. So how do we do that given the disconnect between the client and the people, actually working the show? How do we create that when we're so fragmented?
I think people just need to be intentional about building relationships. It is, by nature of the lifestyle. You could be
Mhm.
working with a particular crew on a particular show and have that kind of show family for a week, a few weeks, maybe months, let's say if you're on tour. But then you
Mhm.
all go off in your own separate directions to the next gig. So it is just by nature, it is fragmented, like you say. And I think, there are organizations, there are societies, there are different memberships that folks can be a part of that are industry specific. I think that's a great opportunity for folks to jump into some of those to establish,
Mhm.
more community, more relationships. It's hard to establish a foundation and to feel like your feet are grounded and planted in something, but
Yeah.
I think you and I have the benefit of working full time for a company. So the folks that we interact with every day are the same people each week. And these technicians don't have that. So it's easy for us to have that sense of community. So I think maybe if folks are intentional again about building relationships and looking at these folks as coworkers, maybe coworkers that you don't necessarily see for 40 or more hours a week, but there might be years in between when you see each other.
Yeah. I think the best companies when I think about I love the what you said, the intentionality around building a show family.
Mhm.
I think that's so great. And there are companies who do a really good job at that of from the onset, from the first crew call, right? Getting everybody together, letting them know, hey, here are the challenges we're going to have on this show. And here's why your job is important. And here are some things that are outside of our control. We're going to ask for some grace and some flexibility, but just know we are so glad you are here. We appreciate
Mhm.
you, the talent you're bringing to this, the time away from your family, really just communicating those things because the common denominator for all those people for that 5-day show is the show.
Mhm.
Everyone's working to create a great outcome. And if we focused more on that commonality versus the differences, I think we might have a different outcome versus the shows we hear about where people are showing up, they don't know where to go. You go over here, I'm called the help. Meals
Yeah.
aren't provided. There's no communication, but I said I thought my call was wrapping at 7, only to find out at 7, no, we're not done. It's going to be another 6 hours. We need you to work till after midnight. Right? There's no like preparation or communication or respect for them as human beings and
Mhm.
what they have going on. So I think I love that phrase of intentionality to build a show family because if you can all come together for the common purpose of creating a great show, you can all walk away really proud of what you accomplished too and to celebrate
Absolutely.
together in that. So I love that. Well, as you think about, obviously, we talk a lot about the stat being 38% of our industry left, right? And so we are trying to entice them back. But also, there's a lot of new people who are entering the
Mhm.
industry because they know we're a cool industry and you get to see great things and do cool things and you can actually establish a career here. So there's a lot of new people who are graduating that are joining the industry. So, what's the best piece of advice you would give to somebody who's new?
So my default answer for this for years was a little tongue in cheek of, show up on time and show up sober, and you'll be ahead of so many people. And while a little crude, I still think that that is solid advice to start with because anybody that's been in this industry long enough knows that there are actual struggles that we have relating to that. But absolutely showing up on time, being willing to pitch in if you're tasked with something, you go and do that task, come back and say, what can I do next? Don't just go and sit in a banquet chair looking at your phone waiting for somebody to give you instruction. Also,
Yeah.
I always say if you see somebody on site doing what you hope to do someday, filling a position in an operator role or whatever it may be that you aspire to someday, befriend that person, talk to them, ask them if they would be willing to mentor you, ask them if they would even be willing to let you shadow them from time to time at your own expense, of course. But just, tag along with them, take notes, see how they're interacting with the client, see what tools they have, see what questions they ask, offer to buy them a coffee or a drink at the bar after the show that day and just pick their brain. I think that's one of the best ways. You have these incredibly brilliant, talented resources that have already shown and proven that they are successful right there that you're working side by side with. And for a lot of other industries, that's not the case. If you
Yeah.
want to be, let's say an actor or you want to be, a doctor or a musician, you don't necessarily always have the best of the best access to those folks. But this
Sure.
industry, there's the benefit of you could be on the next show with them and just say, wow, tell me everything that you know. It's not rocket science what we do, but it still requires a purposeful proactiveness to learn and to grow your skill set.
There's so much in what you just said that I want to unpack. So, I want to talk first about, you're talking about this concept of mentoring and having a mentee, right? And there's a responsibility that each of those have. So, I've asked for mentors in the past and I've mentored people in the past. And the people where those things work really well is where each person does their part. It can't just be somebody saying, hey, you're a high-end operator, teach me. Can I, like you
Mhm.
have to come to the table specific with, here's what I want out of this. Here's how often I would love to be able to communicate with you. Here's what I want to know from you. And it also helps that mentor understand, okay, this isn't just somebody who's going to be attached to me and bothering me for the next 6 days or the next 6 months if we're supposed to stay in touch, right? So it's again, communication, clear rules of engagement. Because I do think there's a lot of people in this industry. There's kind of two camps that I've seen. There's the people who want to mentor because they think our industry is really cool. And let's face it, the more people show up that have talented skill sets, the easier it makes it for everybody on that show, right? When you've got talented people who know
Mhm.
what they're doing. And then you've got the others who are like, why in the world would I pass on my knowledge to my competition? I've worked really hard for this. Nobody mentored me and I figured it out, right? So there's like this, again, that
Mhm.
skeptical aspect of it. And so, but I do think there's something there where if you match the right people, there's a lot of really good that can happen because the reality is, as this next generation retires, and there's a lot that kind of fit that category of people who stayed around through the pandemic, but they're going to be leaving the industry in the next few years. So if we as an industry don't do our part to bring up this next generation, recruit them, train them, invest in them, instill curiosity in them,
Mhm.
we're going to be in trouble. And you think we have a
Yeah.
shortage of talent now. It's going to get worse if we all don't do our part to put our arm around this next generation and help them get up to speed in the right way. So I think that's so great. You gave some great pointers there. Hey, ask them some questions, ask them if you can buy them a coffee, buy them a drink, but have a plan of what you want to know and
Mhm.
get from that, because I think they will get far more out of it if they come prepared with what they're wanting to know. So I think that's such great advice. Well, what mistakes do you see text making? So you talked about not showing up on time, showing up under the influence of something, but what are some of the other, when you think about them building the career, I don't mean just at the show site, but if they're trying to build their career here, which it's all on them, right? If they're freelancers, they have to go find their next job, negotiate it,
Mhm.
get paid, do all that. So what mistakes or missed opportunities do you see a lot of people making?
Especially from where I'm sitting, because again, I'm as not a technical person, I'm usually kind of that first line of defense of seeing the resumes, having the phone calls, the introduction, that first impression. And I do unfortunately see a lot of folks making a bad first impression. You might be super skilled and super talented, and you may not even be super experienced, but you just have a really good, you at least have some experience and you're just, ambitious and really want to get involved. But if you send an email that is, no subject line, there's no signature where your name is, and your email address is the generic one you created, in middle school or high school, gamer529 at gmail.com, that's a bad first impression, because I have no idea who you are. And then there's no subject, there's no introduction, and it's just an email. The body of the email sometimes is hey, how do I get work? And I think there's a big lack of that part of education in the industry as a whole. There's a
Yeah,
lot of education for training the technical skills and operating and, on the gear side, but I think there's a big gap in the other stuff. Just the basic soft skills or the professionalism that I know you and I have talked about before.
yes.
I also see folks burning bridges. To go back to kind of what we previously talked about, if you have a bad experience on site, you know, you've got to remember that who you're working with today, you might not work with them again, but you might work with them again. And that
You might
PA
need
that
them
is,
again. You might need
yeah,
them
that
down the
PA
road.
that is,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, the person who's distributing copies of the show flow to you today and is a production assistant could be the producer of that event in 5 years,
Yeah.
who has the ability and the power, the decision making power to decide whether they want to book you on the gig based on past experience. So burning bridges is huge, just remembering that and putting that into perspective. But I think those impressions go a long way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we talked about companies are building their own brand, their own reputation with their actions. And to all the techs and crew out there, make no mistake, you two are building your brand, not just with your actions at show sites, But when you have a negative attitude on social, when you slam the company you just worked for, people pay attention to those things. And so it's one thing to do it privately, but when you do it publicly, like they're both, people pay attention to that. If you're the person at the show site that's negative and kind of stirring the pot, people know that you are creating a brand. You're now that guy or that person, that girl.
Absolutely.
And so make no mistake, your social media presence is your brand. How you act on
Mhm.
site is your brand. Your actions are absolutely establishing your reputation. So, for all the new people coming in, just be aware of that. Be known for something great. So that's just a piece of advice that I would give, because you and I both know, Michelle, people talk about what we see on social,
Oh, yes.
and it is indicative of your attitude and those sorts of things. So my last question for you, obviously, there is a huge shortage in the industry, which means to me, I always view that as opportunity. That means there's a big opportunity. So there are certain skill sets that are plenty, and there are some that are in really high demand. So if you are somebody considering a career in this industry, what technical skill set do you see is in the highest demand right now?
Oh, that's tough because it feels like everything, right?
And that might be the
Um,
answer. That might be the answer.
I see a lot of let's say LED tech. That's kind of the newest ish technology in the industry, and so I feel like there's just not been enough time to have an
Mhm.
abundance of qualified individuals. I also always say a really solid breakout operator, somebody that can do a little bit of audio, a little bit of video, a little bit of lighting, because
Yeah.
there's always a demand for that. So those are probably the two that stand out. Yeah, I think that's and other than just being everything.
Yeah. Yeah, agree. So a lot of generalist things where it's kind of plug and play. That makes good
Yeah.
sense. Or any last words of wisdom or guidance that you can provide, not just to the new people, but whether it's to the companies, the veterans who have been around a long time, or even the new folks or people considering getting into that. Any guidance or words of wisdom that you want to wrap up with?
I would just say respect each other, respect the folks that are booking you. Understand that even us as a company or your other clients, no one's perfect. Provide a little bit of grace, especially as we're all navigating some difficult,
Mhm.
we're coming out of things and there are things that we're experiencing that we weren't prepared for. We're all still just trying to figure it out, and we're all just really glad to be back to working. But with that comes a little bit of some hiccups and some challenges. But I would always just say, you don't have to love working with everybody, and some people will be difficult to get along with, but you just have to at least make it work for that event, for that time, and be professional and have and be able to roll with the punches. So yeah.
All great things that I think we can all take from it, right? And so my hope is that we don't fall into our previous bad habits. Tom Stimson always says we got a do-over. I could not agree more. And so
Hmm.
now that we know better, we need to do better. And let's not fall into those bad habits. We have an opportunity to kind of reinvent ourselves as companies, as an
Yeah.
industry, as a technician. And
Yeah.
so the ability to be curious, to continue learning, reinvent yourself. There's not a lot of industries that give you the opportunity to do that, because there's so many different paths you can go down in our space. And so it's a great opportunity. So I encourage us all to take it, whether we're trying to reinvent ourselves as a tech, as a producer, as a company, or just as human beings. So, with that, I really appreciate you participating today, Michelle. And as always, if you have any suggestions or comments, please reach out to us at podcast@lasso.io, and don't forget to subscribe.